thank you for joining us once again. This is the God's Balance review for Season 2 of SMITE. We are nearly there and getting underway. My name is Hi-Res Bart. Joining me once again is the one and only Hi-Res Scott and Hi-Res Drybear from our design team. You may know me from esports and all those kind of fun things, but we're going to go and get right into it with what is happening and why it's happening. We'll get into that a little later. We'll start off with, right off the bat, with Kukulkan. This is a god that was nerfed a bit and then now has been rebuffed, and well, it was funny we're talking about it. It's like a split the difference kind of thing. Can you kind of talk about exactly what changed?
Yeah, I think earlier in Season 1 we nerfed him, and I think we went a little bit too far. He obviously dropped out of viability significantly. So really we're just looking to start Season 2 to give him a little adjustment so that he's a little bit more viable again.
Yeah, so he's gone from 2 seconds on the tornadoes or from 3 to 2 and now to 2.5. So hopefully it's the right spot for him. But
which is an extra tick, right? You get
exactly.
an extra hit of that damage source, which helps a lot with the clear.
Yeah, it helps you get your clear earlier on, as well as having more viability as a roaming style of mid laner, more akin to Poseidon. His kissing cousin, Ao Kuang, also has had a little bit of nerfs, or rather, has had nerfs in this patch versus the buffs we see on Kukulkan. And this is coming off of his number 2. The damage per dragon has gone down, but to kind of compensate for that, the scaling has gone up slightly. How do you think this positions Ao Kuang better into a balanced state?
One of the issues that we had with Ao Kuang were players weren't really itemizing fully into the damage just because the base was so high. I mean, you could get Wing Blade into Witch Blade into maybe Demonic Grip, and that was enough damage for you to kill someone. So with the base going down and scaling going up, it means you now can buy a lot of damage items and get the same amount of damage, but you won't have it as active early if you're buying defensive items.
So let's talk about Sobek, another buff coming into the game here, one of our original cast members and one of the iconic guardians of SMITE. A character with a lot of control in the team fights, but seemed to be deficient, especially in contesting objectives, namely the Gold Fury. So the couple of buffs coming to this character, one is that he's getting more defense per stack of his passive. In addition to that, nearly doubling the slow that he's getting out of that ultimate when being channeled. Can you talk a little bit about how you think this positions Sobek to be a bit more competitive against the other Guardians?
Yeah, with Sobek, I think he's a character that we thought was actually, we really like the way he plays. We think he plays well, but he was a little bit underperforming. So really we were looking at taking the things that he does and just make him do them a little bit better. In terms of the passive, that's just going to make him a little bit more durable throughout the course of the game. In terms of the ultimate, though, that's adding a really big CC component, a much more effective soft CC component now when he's going into fights and certainly into team fights. You're definitely going to feel it a lot more now when he's behind you.
It's also a lot of delayed damage. It's great to have that slow to keep him in place, use the slow effectively, and also get maybe a little more damage out or time duration on that ultimate. And now the fact that the stacks have more protections on them means you can be a little more aggressive early. A lot of times players would dash past the wave, miss their hook, and then just end up dying because of it.
Yeah. And I think when we first introduced Sobek, we didn't have as much movement in SMITE at the time. And we didn't have as many ways to basically counter CC. And so now that we have those methods, it makes more sense for it to be a little bit more potent.
Yeah, I think when Sobek was out of the game, there was Odin and Sun Wukong at the time were the only 2 characters that could actually leap. So it was a pretty different environment that he lived in. Also, these changes seem to make him, as you were kind of alluding to, a bit more potent in the lane, less chance of dying, a little bit more kill potential with that ultimate. But let's move on to Nox, a pretty, I guess, lightning rod of a mage over the last couple of months. She's seen some revisions early on in her release. A couple of nerfs here in this patch, although one of them we'll get to in a little bit more detail on her ultimate. But first off, Siphon Darkness has had a little bit of a damage adjustment downward. But on her ultimate, we've added a delay of about a second before that ability fires for a couple of reasons, one being balance, but also readability. So exactly what's changing here, and how is that going to impact maybe how Nox plays, or is it more of a, for her enemies getting a little more information?
Yeah, I think with the ultimate on Nox, one of the things that we got a lot of feedback on was people couldn't tell when she's doing it. It looked a little bit similar to her other abilities. It was hard to get a read on. So when we went to nerf it, because we did want to bring it down as overperforming a little bit, the timing of actually firing it made a lot of sense because we could add a much bigger build-up effect, a much more unique sound effect, and better telegraph to players what's coming.
Sure. So you'll be able to see your Nox ultimates a little bit better when you're trying to fight against the very potent Goddess of Darkness. But that leads us to kind of the final line item here, which is Osiris and Hercules, 2 very prominent bruisers, and sitting kind of at the top of their respective class. And both of them having similar adjustments, although a little bit different. For Osiris, his base attack speed coming down quite a bit, and his scaling getting a little bit better throughout the game. On the other side, Hercules having his base power brought down considerably, and his scaling power as well brought down. So in both cases, basically the quote-unquote free DPS you were getting out of these kits is coming down at the base. Do you think this puts them into more of the Guardian role? Do you think they can still excel in their kind of current hybrid assassination style?
We won't see too much change on Hercules. I mean, really, it just came down to the amount of base damage he's getting from his kit. Strength from Pain was going all the way up till 90 physical power. That's, of course, since he is more of an ability-based warrior, he scales aggressively. I mean, 100% on his ultimate,
Right.
90% on his one. That extra power was kind of just feeding into the rest of the kit. It meant that he didn't have to itemize as much into damage and could buy a lot of defense. In Osiris's case, it was more that all attack speed items obviously scale off of base attack speed, and so starting higher meant that he really only needed 1 or 2 attack speed items to come online. Now, granted, he has a very strong focus on that, good hit chain, a lot of aggression slows, and high movement speed, but it really came down to the fact that he was just really getting that Chin's effectiveness a little bit too fast, and delaying that slightly forward a few minutes helps a lot with him.
Yeah, he'll have a little bit less kill potential, it seems like,
right.
through the mid stages of the game. But that does kind of wrap up our line-by-line god changes, and now we're going to shift over in a similar respect to how Hercules and Osiris were adjusted to Hunters, who have had some changes at the base as well, primarily in terms of attack speed. And just to kind of get this out there and before we get your thoughts on it, the Hunters have basically, across the board, been buffed insofar as that their base attack speed and their attack speed scaling has gone up. And this positions them a little bit more into the primarily being in-handers away from ability damage. And we'll get to some more about that in a second. But first, I want to get your thoughts on bonus attack speed for Hunters now coming into Season 2, what their power curves look like relative to the other roles, and kind of where you see them really excelling now given these changes.
Yeah, so the carry potential from Hunters wasn't as high as we would have liked it to be, especially in Season 1. So a lot of times you'd hit the same level of damage in the power curve as a lot of other characters, mages and junglers, assassins, that kind of thing. So Hunters now, with the higher base and the more aggressive scaling, especially now with the more itemization options they have available, they hit a much stronger late game. And so a lot of times it's a huge benefit to your team to have a Hunter on your team, but they don't really have that kind of forced into the solo lane idea or have to really worry about a position because they're going to be safe in the duo lane and have a lot of strength going into the late game. So having that scaling helps a tremendous amount.
Yeah, I mean, we saw them relegated in many respects to being glorified objective killers in Season 1, and here it looks like they're going to have a lot more viability, as you mentioned, as that traditional hard carry role coming out of the supported duo lane. And now just to highlight a couple of Hunters, as I was talking earlier about ability versus in-hand damage, we have a couple of Hunters that were sitting at the top of the competitive kind of tier list for a long time, namely Rom, Apollo, and Anhur, all known for having excellent clear and excellent in-hand passives or steroids to basically allow them to do both sides of that coin, be fantastic early game laners with their ability clear as well as late game carry potential out of their in-hands and their passives. So basically similar adjustments to Anhur, a little bit different for Apollo, but Anhur and Rom kind of in the same boat where the first target hit takes maximum damage, 100%, and then subsequent targets hit each take 50% of that first damage. So pretty obvious what this accomplishes, right? They just become a little bit less viable as lane clear. And that seems to echo kind of the change of taking the blue buff away from their side of the map. Can you talk a little bit about just the lane dynamic we expect out of some of these Hunters, especially ones that are more skewed towards in-handing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, you see some of the early clears from Apollo, especially with an instant cast, long range, goes through walls. Anhur, of course, a very high aggression. He's known as the early Hunter. Against him, it's difficult to lane. He's got a lot of pressure with the stun, long range ultimate, with a knockup as well, and then built-in penetration. So some of these characters that really were more focused on their abilities, not so much in-handing, had a little bit too much clear. And so bringing that clear level down means that there's a little bit longer duration in between the waves for Hunters to kind of look back and forth between each other. But to supplement that, there's always the introduction of the purple buff. Gives them a little bit of attack speed and a little bit of in-hand power. So it's more about being a Hunter than it is about instantly clearing the wave, much like a mage would.
Right, in-hand clear seems to be more of the theme here than using abilities. And you see that really echoed on Apollo, who is probably the strongest ability-based Hunter. Not necessarily in terms of damage, but certainly the utility that he brings in his kit. And he had the most aggressive downscaling on his clear, and that So Beautiful now will do 15% less damage for each target hit. So that actually gets down to a fairly low amount once you're hitting the 6th minion in line. But that pretty much wraps it up for our God changes. Do you have any kind of final thoughts or words on exactly how all this stuff fits together into one giant, beautifully balanced game?
Well, I mean, it comes down to itemization, right? With the God adjustments comes a new buff, a brand new map, more open space in the Fire Giant Gold Fury, and a ton of new itemization options, and also cheaper items you can get early. So it's, you know, less focus on the gods as it was in Season 1. We did a lot of nerf adjustments looking at the gods themselves, but now we've started moving more knobs and more adjustments to make the game more about what items are you buying, who are you picking, and who are you picking them with.
That's right. Yeah, it's the overall theme of Season 2. It's really been about diversity. Diversity in more item builds, item selection, diversity in the gods that you pick and how you counterpick. And that's kind of a theme that you're going to see recurring really over the course of this year.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks a lot, guys, for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our Gods breakdown. Hope you enjoyed the patch notes preview coming into Season 2. If you want to see more about what's coming up in this patch and see our lovely panel break that down for you, you can click on any of the annotations right here.